Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ahmad Atibul Zulkifli. My metric number is 1Y90798 and I am from Chemistry. Today I will present about the case article review under the topic sale of goods and the case review is the Deus Faiz PTE Ltd versus with the Pacific Navigation Co PTE Ltd in the year 1990 MAJ 65. In the presentation, I will highlight or carry out the three most important, which is the first one is the facts of the case, the second one is the issue that related to the topic, and the third one is the court's decision. Next, for the facts of the case, the plaintiff, which is as the supplier and also the manufacturer for the dues, has claimed a sum of the money $42,953.60 as the price of the new top part, which is the NTP, from the defendant, as the supplier had supplied the NTP to the defendant. And also the defendant has received the NTP and was successfully fitted into the vessel's main engine by the chief engineer. However, on 14 August 1980, the vessel's main engine was damaged. The defendant stated that the NTP was the main cause that the vessel's main engine being broken due to an oversized spring. This also make the vessels in a peril of hazard and unable to be used for the dues. The defendant had claimed from the plaintiff as the plaintiff caused the defendant to bear a loss and also a significant expenditure to cover up all the expenses that will be paid by the defendant. To carry out the problem, an investigation had been done on the vessel's main engine and also the chief engineer logbook to carry out and determine the main cause of the problem. From the investigation had been done on the vessel's main engine, there are two causes of the damage to the engine that had been spotted by the investigator. The first one is the effect of the damage at the adjustment ring in the coupling of the first in front of the first pump, and the second one, the key groove of the crankshaft have grown from its initial size, which is it's supposed to be 8 mm. It grown to 14 mm. However, the plaintiff claimed that the failure was caused by a poorly built link between the first and the second pumps and led to the key groove damage. For the second investigation, which is on the chief engineer logbook, they stated that the maintenance of the vessel had been done properly. The logbook stated that the date for the maintenance of the vessels in the previous time. Based on the chief engineer logbook, there are no reports that has been submitted stated the main engine was breakdown, the damage on the coupling or the injector pump, or also the damage to the crankshaft. The engineer also do not open the coupling. The main engine was worked properly without any problem until when the NTP was supplied by the plaintiff and also was the plug in. The main engine broke down about 107 hours after the implementation of the NTP itself. However, the plaintiff argued that the chief engineer had failed when fitting the NTP due to the inability, inexperience, and also shoddy repairs on the chief engineer and his crew. The chief engineer denied the statements by the plaintiff. He mentioned that along the services that he done with the Deus ship, and from the time he joined in the December 1977 to the August 1980, he had no experiencing engine breakdown when servicing or maintaining the vessel. He also mentioned that he had an expertise in changing the top unit of the fuel injector pump, and he had do that in the several times. The engine do not fail on the previous instances, but he said when it come to the NTP, the adjustment screw, which is the calibration, not all the engine had the same technique. But in these cases, he mentioned that when he adjusting the screw, he refer to the Deuce manual book accordingly. He knew that what will happen if the adjustment is done correctly, the engine performance will suffer, and also if the adjustment was made too far, the fuel injector pump may be damaged. When he started the engine, he had been able to do. He also mentioned that he had got a certificate in stating that he had an expertise in changing the top unit of the fuel injector. The defendant counterclaimed that the equipment which it has been supplied by the plaintiff was not merchantable and qualitable, and he claimed a considerable loss and also expenditure to the plaintiff. And the plaintiff argued that the failure of the vessel main engine was not because the NTP, but it is due to the poor condition of the engine as it was installed in 1955. The plaintiff stated that the engine was too long to be done, and the chances for the engine to be broken is high due to the poor condition and the poor performance of the engine. Next, for the issues that is related with the topic is whether the goods that have been supplied by the plaintiff are the cause of the indirect loss that has been faced by the defendant due to the oversized spring in the NTP. If the plaintiff is proven guilty, so this means that the plaintiff does not meet the intention or the purposes when the buyer buys the goods, which is the goods must be reasonably fit for the purposes for which the buyer wants them. In this case, the buyer relied on the seller skills to supply, and there is an implied condition which is the goods should be reasonably fit for each purposes. In this case, we can see that the NTP that has been supplied by the plaintiff does not meet the purposes for the buyer, which is to be used in the vessel's main engine until the vessel's main engine has breakdown due to the NTP. Next, for the court's decision, the courts decide to give the judgment to the defendant on their counterclaim and the cost for the damages to be assessed. For the first one, is the NTP is the main cause for the failure of the vessel's main engine. We can see that from the investigation that had been done, there are two effect cause damages which is related to the NTP, and also the NTP shows that it has a shorter and a long thicker spring that cause the damage to the vessels. For the second one is the plaintiff are liable to supply merchantable, delivery and also installation without any checkup need to be done by the defendant. If the defendant had opened the NTP on the delivery, the chief engineer would not realize that the combination was not correct. The third one is that the defendant depends on the plaintiff to provide the NTP that could be used for the engine. As I mentioned before, the NTP is liable to supply the NTP that meet with the purposes of the buyer. If the supplier or the plaintiff does not meet the intention that once with the buyer or the defendant, there is a breach of the contract. And for the fourth one is that For the engineer's logbook, there is only one signature in each entry in the logbook. The defendant does not attempt to identify the signature. It also stated that there is no signature from the chief or the master engineer to determine the accuracy of the logbook. Next, the plaintiff also are liable to breach of the contract and negligence in the manufacturing of the NTP. As the plaintiff has breach of the contract, the plaintiff are also liable to the defective good that have they sold, even though they are negligent or not, such as a flaws that can be found with a reasonable examination. We can see that the NTP has caused the vessel's main engine to be damaged, and this is a reasonable examination that be found that the goods that have been supplied from the plaintiff is a defective good. And also since the plaintiff react as a manufacturer, there is a liable to the negligence in the manufacturing of the ATP. Just that from me. Thank you.